Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today for our Understanding FDA Expectations for CAPA. This is an Ask the Expert session. So this is a first time we're trying this new format. We hope you guys like it. And this is going to be a little bit different because it's sort of the inverse of what we typically do, which is a longer presentation and a shorter question time. This time, we're going to be doing fewer slides and more questions. When everyone registered, you should have had the option to enter a question that you would like answered in this session. And with that, we have taken all of those wonderful questions that you guys have given us and compiled them and kind of organized them and put some slides together to answer some of the common questions that we have. So thank you, first off, for all of these wonderful questions that we're going to be answering today. A couple housekeeping things as always. First off, if you are here with your team, we would love to give you a shout out. So you can go ahead in the chat area of the menu and you can let us know if you're here with your team. We'll try to give you a shout. And we will be sending a recording of this session next week, along with the slide deck. It's, like I said, it's not long like our normal ones are, but it's got most of the common questions that were answered in those slides. Everyone is on mute. Because we've already got so many questions to answer in the session, if we have extra time at the end of the session, we will be taking any questions in the chat or questions module that you put in there. And let's see here, what else? If your question is not answered, we will be getting back with you. We're trying to track everybody's questions. And if for some reason we run out of time or your question was really specific, we're going to be circling with you next week and getting you an answer to that question. We want to make sure everyone can get their questions answered. We have so many that we can't even cover them in this whole session, but we're going to keep at it, and you may hear from us in the next week if you don't get that question answered in the session. We have wonderful resources here with us today. We have our own Regina Fullin, and we also have our other panelists today, Adela Crandell, which I'll be introducing in just a moment. All right. So if you just dropped in, I threw out a couple housekeeping things, high level. First off, welcome. If you're with the team, let us know. We'll give you a shout out. We're going to answer as many of the questions you have submitted to us during registration as we possibly can. And if you didn't get your question answered in the session, we will be following up with you afterwards. So everyone at some point will get their CAPA question answered. We have had some really wonderful questions submitted and we appreciate it. Okay, so let's get to introducing today's panelist. First up, we have Regina Fullin. And you guys, if you've been in sessions with us before, you know her very well. Regina assists in our medical device and pharmaceutical clients to help them achieve ever-increasing compliance with regulations in pharma, medical device, and related industries. Within her role here at Compliance Team, she is one of our key writers, helping publish meaningful and relevant articles about regulatory changes, industry trends, and product quality. She has many wonderful certifications and they keep adding up, but I'm going to need more space for this paragraph, probably by the next webinar. But she is a certified quality engineer. She is a certified quality auditor, a certified manager of quality organizational excellence with ASQ. And she holds a regulatory affairs certification for medical devices with RAPS. So as always, wonderful to have Regina with us. And we are super excited today to have Adela Crandell, and she, as a senior consultant, assists us here at Compliance Team. She is an expert in FDA compliance from bench scale development to clinical supplies and marketed products. She focuses on quality systems and common sense approach to validation, quality assurance, and regulatory compliance. She has been instrumental in product startups and technical transfers in a wide variety of CGMP environments, including food, cosmetics, medical devices, pharmaceuticals, and contract manufacturing. After 30 years of corporate leadership, Adela launched her career in new directions as a freelance writer and a consultant, and we are glad to have her in those roles. Her soul is infused with health, science, quality principles, so you will see that side of her in all that she writes. Not only has she written 2 books, science-based essays, and newspaper articles, she has taught college classes in technical writing. She has created the Black Tortoise Press, where she guides up-and-coming authors through the publishing process. So, man, oh man, what a lineup we have today. And we're so excited to have both Regina and Adela with us. I am Valerie Hoffman, marketing here at Compliance Team, and I am glad to have you here as well. Without any further ado, I think we're going to dive on into it. And I'm going to turn it over to Adela.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Val. And welcome everyone to this webinar. Many of you asked questions about the regulatory requirements. What are the biggest gaps to identified in CAPAs? How is FDA approaching CAPAs today? What are the requirements by FDA? And of course, that sometimes seems to be ever changing. I look at it in a couple different ways. First, looking at the requirements, 211-192, investigation of discrepancies. That has been number 2 or 3 in the number of 483s for at least 7 years. So focusing on CAPA is very important. In the device industry, 820-100, the CAPA procedure has been number 1 for at least 9 years. And CAPA has been mentioned 3 times in the top 10 483s last year. Those things, the top things are CAPA procedures, CAPA documentation, and investigation of device failures. And I'm sure that those things are going to be very similar in the pharmaceutical area. How you documenting your procedures, whether the CAPAs are done on time, whether they're thorough or not. One thing I'd really like to stress, though, is FDA is only one reason to focus on CAPAs. It's very important to focus on CAPAs because of FDA, but that's going to be, FDA is going to come in maybe every 2 years. If you have something ready for approval, maybe more often, but you want your CAPA program to be working for your organization. Like I said, obviously you want to avoid 483s, but when FDA does come in, you can gain from the experience that the FDA investigator has, because they have seen a whole array of different organizations' CAPA programs, and they just might be asking you questions that are based on problems that occurred with other organizations. So listen to what their questions are, and if you have a question about what they're getting at, make sure you ask that question. What is your concern? Again, FDA should not be the main driver. Your business should be the main driver. And then I'll turn it over to Regina.
And this graphic illustrates a specific concern with that a lot of you asked is, whether you have to CAPA everything. And I've heard people call it death by CAPA or something like that. And so, so some of the questions, do all CAPAs require corrective and preventive action? And I would say, yes, they do, but do you have to have a CAPA on everything? And the answer is no. And so this graphic illustrates that as you get, in the very beginning, if you're deciding you want to spend a lot more cost in firefighting over here, or here you're spending a lot of cost in bureaucratic garbage, as you decrease your spending, should I say, as you increase your spending in preventive costs, your costs in bureaucracy decrease. And so what you end up creating is a nice little functioning area of quality risk management. And that's where you want to be, this ideal inflection point where your quality costs are minimized because you're firefighting less and preventing more, but not so much that you're overspending. So this answers a lot of questions about, what does a robust CAPA system look like? Well, it looks like you're spending money on repeated systemic problems that your fix will fix more than just a small nonconformity, but it's actually going to be impactful. And that will benefit your organization in the long run. And a lot of you, some of you also asked is, what is the difference between an ISO-based quality systems CAPA requirements and a Part 820 requirement? And really, there's only very minor differences having to do with whether you're verifying a corrective action is effective versus whether you're validating whether that corrective action is effective, for instance. So again, you're just functioning in this beautiful range where things are mostly linear and not too expensive. And this is how you also manage your CAPA pushback, which some people said, how do you manage that when somebody is asking you for a CAPA that you think is necessary and other people don't? And again, you use that that criteria of, is this a systemic or repeated problem that our CAPA can address an organizational issue in a meaningful, impactful way. And then the next question was that you asked was about how much information should I provide in the CAPA? And the amount of information that should be provided is enough that you get to what the actual problem is. You define that problem succinctly, and anything beyond that might be excessive. Again, we want to keep things focused on impact. And CAPA, if you read 820, is a specific 7-step process that they identify very much. So first you analyze the quality data to identify the nonconformities and potential nonconformities. That would be the PAW part of the, so you are going to find different ways of evaluating that, either through quality audits or through complaints or through, you find an OOS. And then again, these need to be systemic or repeated nonconformities, not your average daily oops. And for that, then, when you see that you have a systemic problem, you're going to investigate that to the root cause. And it'll either be to the product, the process, or the quality system. Yes, you can CAPA your quality system as well. And then you identify those actions needed to prevent that recurrence. So you need to understand the root cause of those nonconformities first before you can determine what needs to happen to prevent the recurrence. And you may have some interim actions too, that you're going to be doing maybe some short-term containment actions, and then maybe some longer-term interim actions until you can have the long-term action that prevents the recurrence from happening. And step 4 is very important. Validation, that's part 820, and verification, which is in ISO 13485, to assure that your corrective action is both effective and there are no ill effects associated with that corrective. We'll get into that a little bit further. Then you implement those corrective actions. And then at the end, you need to do some kind of effectiveness check. We got a lot of questions about effectiveness check, and I had an illustrative example that we prepared later here. And then all of this needs to be rolled up into some kind of management review where management reviews that information in your, I don't know how frequently you do it, at the appropriate interval that works for your organization. And you see, it goes, it's cyclical. And this is now Adela.
Okay. Sorry, I was reading the chat for a second. Several of you asked questions about when to use what tools and how do I know what tool I should use. And here are some examples of the different tools. The fishbone diagram, where you're looking at all the things that could lead into the root cause of the issue. And in those cases, you're going to be looking at the inputs of management, personnel, method, material, machine, and measurement or test. And then the is and is not, when, where, how, why, and who, and 5 whys. What a couple of people asked about if I could give an example of the 5 whys, and that is something I find this a very useful tool to keep digging into different levels of why. The example I will give you is from the pharmaceutical industry, but it can be applied other places too. Let's just say you have you're mixing and you have parameters for mixing, 5 to 10 minutes, and you've gone 15 minutes. So the question is, why did I go 15 minutes over? Why did I overshoot the mixing? Maybe that was because there was supposed to be an automatic stop and that failed. And the question is, why did it fail? And the answer to that question could be, as I say, I'm just kind of making this up as a possible example, but the answer to that question could be, it was not reset after the last process. The next question is, now we're on question 4. Why 4? Why wasn't it reset? Perhaps that question is a problem with post-production check. Why did the post-production check fail? It's not specified in the procedure for the post-production check. So now you have a root cause and you have an obvious corrective action. There may be times when you're using the 5 whys that you feel like, oh, I have the answer already at why 1. I invite you to please keep digging down to make sure you've asked all of the whys that you need to ask. And the reason for that is because sometimes you fix the problem with the first why. Like in the example, you might say, well, it failed because no one set the alarm. And then you say, okay, that's personnel. We'll just correct that. We'll retrain the person. But that's not, you haven't actually gotten to the root cause of that. The types of tools that you use, here's 3 of them. There could be others. The types of tools that you use should be listed in your procedure or your master plan for investigations. They should be science-based and statistically sound. And whenever possible, when you find your root cause, you should also test that root cause on a bench scale basis or with equipment to check whether that actually fixes the problem. That'll lead into some of the questions that come up later on about how do you know when your CAPA is done. So let's see. Some other questions that came up with how much information should be given. I think Regina actually answered that question on enough information to know that you know what the problem was, who was involved, where it happened, how, why, and when, and enough of an investigation that it indicates that it's thorough. I think that answered all the questions that were related to that, but if you have an additional question, please make sure you add it to the chat. Now I'll turn it back over to Regina.
So when we're talking about CAPA documentation, we had a lot of questions about, how do we ensure that people are documenting things properly? I'm trying to get other people to document things well. And there's a few, CAPA documentation tips that we'll kind of, talk about here. First of all, you need to keep organized. You have to use a consistent documentation numbering system for your CAPAs. Now, if you have an electronic system, it will do that for you, and you'll be able to filter that for yourselves.
Regina, thank you so much for taking over for me without.
I was like, I didn't know this was my slide, but I decided to take over. Would you like to speak?
Yeah, I'll keep going on this one.
Okay, go ahead.
I didn't realize we were on number 9. Okay. As Regina was saying, it's good to have consistency, and you really should have everything documented in, I like to call it a master plan, but you may have it a different name for it, but sit down and think about all the potential reasons why you might, or systems that you might require a CAPA, whether it's laboratory testing, measurement, procedures, computer systems, and think about the level of detail or the level of the level of detail that you might need for all those different kinds of investigations, and what kind of CAPAs might come up. Make sure you have a cross-functional CAPA review board, which seems difficult if you're a small organization, but just think about what hats people wear. You might have to double up, like maybe your quality assurance person is also your regulatory person, so they will have to look at it from 2 different perspectives. But make sure you have a second quality, an independent quality unit that reviews the investigations. Develop templates so that you are guided through the CAPA process, and it's the same way every time. There's 2 really good reasons for that. It really helps you to be as thorough with each investigation. It helps you with trend analysis. It helps with management review, and it also helps an inspector or investigator who's looking at it from outside. And if you think about it, just from a very practical standpoint, all the information is in the same place on the page or screen each time you look at it. So if you're looking at where are the statistical tools used for CAPA, you're looking at the same place. You're not searching all through a paragraph trying to find out whether or not it was actually done. Obviously, define each problem succinctly using a is or is not tool as appropriate. In your master plan, make sure you identify all the potential tools you might want to use, and where possible, what situation it would work with, and what, and also leave some room for something that you haven't identified yet. CAPA trending is a required topic for management review, and it also helps you as an organization, because I can't tell you how many times I've seen that you don't realize that a specific issue is coming up in one system and it's also in another system until you sit down with the annual review and go through those things. So, sometimes your CAPA and your quality system, and sometimes your quality system needs a CAPA. So don't be afraid to use that system for that too. So FDA sees that kind of introspection as a good thing. So having corrective action for your quality system is a good thing. Now I'll turn it over to Regina.
Thank you, Adela. Yeah, I didn't want to overlook this slide, so, but a lot of you had questions about root cause investigations, and specifically with the frustrations involved in doing a good root cause analysis and the amount of time that it takes to get at the root cause of a CAPA when it could be anything, that you may have used the tools and you may have identified multiple potentially contributing causes, but you can't really get at the root cause. And I'm going to use an example that we had where we knew that there was, this was a software as a device type of thing, and for only one customer did this bug emerge, and all other customers, it was operating fine. And then they tried to do the root cause analysis, but the customer upgraded their operating system and then it went away. So we were never able to get at the root cause of the failure, because after the operating system upgrade, this customer was operating just as swimmingly as our other customers. So we could not document the root cause. We couldn't find it. We couldn't recreate it unless we built a IT infrastructure that was identical to our clients. And that would have been excessively costly, especially since the problem went away on its own. So what did we do in this instance? Well, in the investigation, we documented everything we did do to identify what the root cause could have been and what tests we had conducted based on our use of the tools to determine whether we could find that problem. And at least in that instance, we couldn't find the root cause, but we showed what we had done to try to find it, which helps immensely, because when the FDA comes to inspect, they may be upset that you didn't find the root cause, but they can certainly see that you really tried your darndest. So in this case, that process was obsoleted. And it was replaced with a better process, or in this case, they had a better operating system. And so the effectiveness check in the instance of this example was that also it was the investigation, because we could show that the problem went away after there was an operating system update, and that seemed to have corrected the problem. And there was nothing else we could do. Sometimes you get a situation where you have multiple contributing causes, or you have the perfect storm between two unlikely things that just happened coincidentally that caused a problem that may have elevated to a level of risk that could appear to be a systemic problem. That, well, if those two things coincidentally happen again, that would be a repeated or systemic problem, so you need to CAPA it. So in those instances, you may have to actually address two contributing causes for your root cause investigation. So that, verification of effectiveness then comes to, oh wait, we're still in number 10. So many of you did ask those questions, and about CAPA extensions that kind of go with this too. So if you can't find the root cause, should you extend the CAPA or should you not? And the question that it depends. It is absolutely dependent on what you are trying to find out and how long it's going to take to find it out. So every CAPA based on the complexity, how long do you think it's going to take to resolve it, based on the urgency, you're going to be setting your dates differently. And then if you have to have an extension, what's very important, again, show your work. It's like math class, show your work and show all the avenues in which you did try to resolve the CAPA, and go from there. But you would not want to extend a CAPA, or it would be very difficult to justify to the FDA that you are extending a CAPA simply because you didn't have sufficient resources to resolve it. The FDA does expect that that an organization be adequately resourced to take care of CAPA. So there had better be documentation in that that says that that you had been doing some work and ran up against a roadblock, ran up against something that forced you to be delayed in such a situation.
I just want to piggyback on that a little bit.
Sure.
Regina. I think it's also very important to have some of this outlined in your master plan or procedure so that you are giving yourself the option to extend it as long as it's justified. And as Regina was saying, justification does not mean some version of I didn't have time. So just resolve it honestly. Sometimes you need to do some trend analysis to make sure that the CAPA was effective. So it could take a little time, but those, I'll just call them rules for when you can extend and how you can extend it, should be in your procedure.
Thank you, Adela. I agree. And moving on, when you have a CAPA done and you're trying to do an effectiveness check, how do you know it's effective? So I decided that, for this one, we're going to do a kind of a fun exercise where we consider CAPA in your life. And suppose you just got stopped for your third speeding ticket and you are now worried that you may face a license suspension. Okay, first of all, it is a CAPA because it's a repeated issue and there may be something systemic to it that caused that to happen. So one thing that's important is that you can't just jump to conclusions and move right into CAPA. Why? Because there's different ways you could resolve this problem, and you need to select the one that's correct. You could either just say, I'm not going to do anything, and you know what, if I get stopped for another ticket, well, I'll just drive on a suspended license because, I don't care. And then, the second scenario is, okay, I'm going to just sell my car, and I'm now not going to use a car. I'm going to just stop using a car. The third one is, okay, I'm going to minimize my driving by working at home and getting my groceries delivered, and I'll minimize the amount of driving that I do so that I'm not driving as much. You could say, okay, you know what, every time I get stopped, it's because I'm rushed, I'm hurrying, and maybe I haven't given myself enough time to get to my appointments, and that. Or the last thing is like, oh, well, I was just tooling around in my sports car. Maybe what I need to do is I need to drive a subcompact car where I don't feel so lead-footed. Now, the first thing you have to do is, do your 5 whys, do your effectiveness check. Your effectiveness check for the first one would be, okay, I'm going to drive on a suspended license. Is that really effective? No, not at all. The second one is the second one may not be effective either, because now, not having a car may really seriously impact your life. And part of the effectiveness check is to verify that not only is the solution effective, but that it doesn't adversely affect any other parts of the process. The third one is, okay, I'm going to minimize my driving, but maybe you're not getting at the root cause of the behavior. So then the last two are, addressing maybe root cause behavior, but you may have to do 5 whys, or an is not, or a or cause and effect diagram to determine whether it's because you're being rushed, or maybe because you're just like to speed. So in this situation, how would you find out whether that solution that you choose is effective? Okay, well, let me see. There's several ways. You might determine whether you're going to get more speeding tickets. Maybe you need, maybe none of these are effective. Maybe you need to insert a more technological solution, like a something that goes onto your GPS that tells you when you're speeding and tells you to slow down. So you have to, get a little creative in this, and maybe you have to determine, is it about speeding tickets? Is it that my license is that I've cleared all 3 speeding tickets? And is it good enough for me just to let 1 speeding ticket fall off of my record? That is a decision between you and your subject matter expert on the process, and your quality group. And you, as a cross-functional team, using your CAPA review board, need to be in agreement as to what is considered sufficient to verify that you're effective, that your solution is effective and does not harm other parts of the process. And it may take a long time, for instance, for you to determine that your at least one of your tickets has fallen off your record, but that's how long it takes. As long as it's specified in your effectiveness check plan, and that you've all agreed to it, and you had your quality representative sign off on it, it should be adequate. Now, it may recur. You may end up, as soon as it falls off your record, it comes back on. Well, now you know that your correction was not effective. Now you need to go back through your quality tools and determine whether your root cause really was eliminated or at least mitigated by your solution. So I hope I've answered some of these questions about effectiveness check.
Hey, Regina,
Yes.
if you don't mind, just for a little fun here, I added the poll, and I think this is a fun question. So I create a little poll for that. So if you can leave that slide up, I'll launch the poll and we'll have a little fun for a second.
Yeah,
And
and I actually did see a question that popped up. How long should the verification of effectiveness last? And
right.
again, that is agreed upon by your quality group or your CAPA review board that determines how long will it take for you to actually show that the system has been corrected. And in the case of this, driving scenario, you may decide that you have to wait at least as long for at least one of your tickets to fall off your driving record for you to say that the CAPA was effective. How long is that? Well, you go find out how long that's going to take. And then that's your due date for your CAPA. You might add another month to that date so that you have a sufficient amount of time to gather the data you need to show. You may be able to do things with a trend chart using statistical analysis, and you may be able to get it done sooner, but there is no set time in the regulations saying how long that needs to be. It needs to be reasonable. It does need to be time bound. It's like SMART goals, it's measurable, it's specific. And if you can get a measurable, specific measurement or fact that you can verify, that is what you want in your effectiveness check. It's not a specific thing. So we have a poll here, and
I realized, I just put A through E. So real quick, if you're like, wait, I don't know what the answers are, I'll go over them real quick, and then we'll kind of wrap up this little fun side
yeah, go ahead.
Poll, I guess. A is you do nothing and will drive on suspended license. B is you'll sell your car and use Lyft or Uber. C is you'll find work at home and remote. That's pretty easy right now. And get your groceries delivered. D is you decide to simplify your schedule so you're not so rushed and won't be speeding. Or E is you trade your sports car for a nice, sensible subcompact so you aren't tempted to speed. So those are our options. If you haven't voted, this is certainly not necessary, but just something fun we thought we'd do. We're about halfway through our session, so it looks like I'm gonna call it. It's by a landslide, really. It's looking like D. So if you want to pop in there and you have if you have strong feelings on one of those, this is like one of those magazine quizzes or BuzzFeed. That's what I'm thinking of.
What is again? What was D again?
D is you decide to simplify your schedule so you're not rushed. That is a very practical solution. We have a very smart and practical audience with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll out. And I'll share
that is a fun little poll. And yeah, I do think that we all could use a little extra time in our schedules and not be so rushed in life. But thank you for pushing that poll. I was not, that's a nice little fun thing.
That was fun.
Okay, so I guess on to the next topic, which is Adela's.
Before we get into this, I just realized that there was one other question that I particularly liked was, what happens if you have a bunch of old CAPAs and the people that started them might not even be there anymore? What do you do with those? That's like a mystery to be solved a lot of times. It's a very good question. And I've actually had that happen before. and it can be very
And
frustrating, but you do need to resolve them. And the best thing to do is to go back through the investigation. If they did a good investigation, you'll see what the whole issue was. You'll see the whole story. And however you do resolve them, it needs to be justified, and you might be using trend analysis or also looking at your change control system to see whether or not this is a CAPA that even needs to be resolved anymore, because I've seen CAPAs that were several years old that the piece of equipment isn't even in service anymore. So there could be ways like that to close it out. So it is a mystery to be solved, but if you look at it that way, it can be kind of fun too.
Adela, I might add that this is an example of a CAPA that needs to be against your CAPA system, because there's going to be like a 5 whys and why did this fall through the cracks? And,
Right. So you will need to tell a story when you
yes.
close that out. And as tell a story, I don't mean make something up. I mean, you'll have to tell the story of why this wasn't done and how you are resolving it. Not fiction, memoir. So this next slide shows about one of many people's favorite catch-all is it was personnel. And we have on here why good people sometimes do bad things. I'd like to think of it more why good people sometimes make mistakes. Mistakes do happen. That is human nature. But the whole purpose of the GMPs is to put systems in place to prevent human error. And there is a little bit in the GMP that's much overlooked section that says the personnel must have the correct education, training, and experience to do the job. And if you are using this personnel or training as your reason for your root cause and retraining is your CAPA, then you need to look at, do I have the right people? That's one thing, one reason why I would not want to use this as a catch-all. And investigators will look at that the same way. If they see that you're using personnel or training as your catch-all, they'll be looking at, well, what are the qualifications for your personnel? And what's your training system like? So think about it that way. And thinking about it from that human error, because it is, to err is human, as they say. Isn't that Shakespeare? There could be a lack of prompts. You might be over-relying on memory. So you need some templates or some Poka-yoke error capturing methods. You could have a poor system design so that people are just set up to fail. And you don't want, when you're always blaming people, then it creates a toxic workplace and people will be hesitant to report issues. So think about it that way, that if you hire good people, they're trying to do a good job. Most people don't go to work and try to do a bad job. And if they do, then you've got the wrong people. So, okay, that's it for that slide.
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing about the people and having the right people, and this compliance fit. We want to find people who have a compliance mindset in the first place. So, these issues can repeat with people who don't have the appropriate mindset toward their jobs. And training can address a lot of that. But sometimes, sometimes people aren't not right for the role that they're in. That doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means that they're not appropriate fit for the role. And, so now we're just kind of going to do a summary here. And, as Adela pointed out, that in short, CAPA needs to benefit the organization. It's not just a compliance requirement, so you shouldn't be creating CAPAs to check a box to say that, oh yeah, we have a CAPA. No, it's about looking deep at your problems in your company and coming up with workable solutions that benefit the company and should benefit the bottom line, and that you're maximizing the benefit from your compliance cost. And that it should be based on risk and it should be based on science. And that means that CAPA needs to be based on for those repeated things that are high risk, that are for systemic issues. And that if you have a compliance issue that's that serious, then you need to have very good documented rationale in investigations, and that templates will help you to deal with that. And that if you are going to have a CAPA system, you should have a CAPA review board, and there should be documented procedures for how that review board evaluates CAPAs, where you can work collectively to document that rationale, and it's not dependent on one person alone doing the work. And that will help to avoid blame. That will help your people to thrive. And you want to have minimize the personnel CAPAs, because good people operating in a bad system will fail every time because they're set up to fail. So what we want to do is you want to error-proof the process and avoid human errors, so that your system is doing the work and you're just putting people into the system and they're following the GMP rules that you've established that are appropriate for the risk level of your product. And again, there are no set rules in the standards or in the regulations for how long it should take to resolve a CAPA, how long it should take for an investigation, how quickly it needs to be closed. If an unreasonably set time frame is permitted for closing a CAPA, you are going to close the CAPAs on paper only, and you will not have actually resolved the issues in a way that will benefit your organization. So if you have a problem that is deep and wide, it will likely take longer to resolve. But once that resolution is employed, your organization will benefit greatly. So don't just set a time frame saying it's going to be closed in 6 weeks come hell or high water. It's got to be appropriate for what you are trying to do. And you can have a, for the verification of effectiveness, you can have a situation where you have a provisional closure where you've completed the corrective and preventive action, and now it's in a provisional closed state pending verification of effectiveness. And you can set that time frame for that, appropriate for what it needs to be. I think we've answered a lot of questions already that have been posed, but I think, Val, if there's time left, we can open the floor for like 6 more minutes of questions, 5 more minutes of questions.
Yeah, that sounds great. So on your menu options here in GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar, you should see a questions box. You can go ahead and type your question in. We'll answer as many questions as we can. If we don't get to it in the session, like I said, we're tracking all of these questions that have been asked to us, and we're going to do some follow-up next week because we want to make sure everyone gets their question answered. Regina, just a couple wrap-up housekeeping things before we get into the questions. If you can go to the next slide.
Before we go there, I just want to, while we're waiting for questions, I just want to say, spend some time with your procedure for investigation and CAPAs. I can't stress that enough, that think it through, really look at it systematically with your processes, and try to think about what kind of issues are going to be something that can be fixed on the spot. Say there's a process stops because of a power outage. That's not something that would necessarily need a CAPA unless you have a persistent power outages more, over and over again. So take the time with your procedure to kind of think through how you're going to approach the investigation and the CAPAs so that you have a lot of planning up front.
Great additional comments there, Adela. Thank you. It looks like we've got a couple of questions. I want to mention real quick that if you see the QR code on your screen, if you're not familiar with those, if you take your handy dandy smartphone, if you have one handy, and turn it over to camera, that's off the home screen, just do that, and point it at that little funny looking code, it will take you to our LinkedIn page. And that is where you can kind of get all of our most recent announcements and things and follow us. You can also check us out, a quick plug from the marketing person here, complianceteamllc.com. We've got a resource library you can check out. You can book a consultation with us if there's something further you want to discuss. And we've got a lot of articles and things that we've published on there as well. So we hope you find it really helpful and informative. Our goal is always to serve before we sell. So we're here to help and make your life easier. With all that, I think I got the marketing housekeeping, so thanks for bearing with me on that. We do have a few questions. Samuel has a couple great questions. His questions are, how long should the VOE last? And will we be able to have access to the slides? And yes, so one other thing, we'll send out probably Monday, everyone will get a copy of this brief presentation as well as a link to the recording of this session. So if you want to share that with teammates, if you want to review some of the material, I know this is a lot of information coming at you today, absolutely, you'll be getting that. And I had a couple other people ask that as well. So I think that wraps up a couple of the, will we be getting the slides questions we've been asked. So how long should the VOE last? Which one wants to take this question?
I think we already answered that, but basically it's an agreement between the CAPA initiator, the CAPA review board, and the person who is performing the CAPA. And it's as long as it takes, using a rational, justified reason and a plan for how that verification of effectiveness will take place. So there's no set timing for this. The CFR does not have a specific guideline for how long it will take. It will take longer for more difficult verifications, and it will take less time for simpler problems to resolve.
Okay.
If you have an evaluation that takes several batches, for example, it would take longer than if you just needed to do one run of a product. And in that case, if you're going to have a longer time frame, then you may want to have some interim reports. So just make sure that you justify what you choose, and understand the difference between giving a reason and giving a justification. Make sure that your justification is supported by scientific data.
Okay. So our next question is, does it sound correct that verified complaints and scrap batches must have a CAPA?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, absolutely. So they're asking if it sounds correct that verified complaints and scrapped batches must have a CAPA.
I don't think that that's necessarily the case. Complaints, I have worked on, at least in the medical device side, depending on the nature of the complaint and depending on the severity and whether we already understand what the root causes are, like if that issue has been investigated previously and we understand that the severity is low, you can potentially do some kind of a closure on the complaints based on that known understanding. Scrapped batches, unfortunately, there is a requirement that every batch failure be investigated. Does that necessarily mean that it's a CAPA?
Yeah,
No.
well, depend on what the reason for the scrapping is. I mean,
Right. Yeah, not necessarily. It depends on what did you identify as your root cause for your investigation.
Okay. I think we're going to answer one more question, but if you have another question that you'd like answered, we'll get back with you offline or, following next week. So go ahead and type it in, but we're only going to take one more live question. And so that question is, the term management review, is it in 21 CFR 211?
I don't think it's specifically in 211. It is in Q7A, which, although that's for APIs, it's a Q7A is much more prescriptive, and a lot of finished dose companies use that as a guideline, and FDA does come in and look at management review for pharmaceuticals as well.
What 211 does specify is the quality unit. So you must have a quality unit that is responsible, that is assuming that responsibility, and in those responsibilities for the quality unit, there may be management review, but I do believe that as Adela said, it is in Q7A. It's implied through the quality unit in 210, 211, or 211 specifically.
All right.
I think we are done. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. Do we want to leave the poll open just a little bit longer so people can put their questions in, or
well, actually, if you'll bounce to the next slide, Regina. Give me a second, sorry. If you'll bounce to the next slide, yes. So you can visit us again at complianceteamllc.com. There is a contact us form. So if you think of a question after the fact, a follow-up question, absolutely, please let us know, and we'll be glad to answer that for you. Again, if you want to check out some of the resources we've got there, we have a resource library that's always expanding. Thank you so much for attending today. Thank you, Adela, for your expertise, and Regina, as always. We hope you guys have found this informational. Informative. Sorry. We'll be getting with you next week if your question wasn't answered. And feel free to follow up with us anytime. We're always happy to take a question and answer it the best we can for you. We will be having another webinar next month. More on that later, but stay tuned. If you haven't signed up for our emails, make sure to get those so you'll be one of the first to know when that is released, or you can follow us on LinkedIn as well, and make sure not to miss those. Thanks everyone, and we hope you have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.